Good morning. Welcome to the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. My name is Tim Morrison, and I will be your host for this morning's virtual program. As many of you know, in the past, we've come together as a community at our building in person in Skokie, but things have changed a little bit. The world has been upended a bit, so we're coming to you virtually. We're going to be doing this on alternating Sundays through the rest of this summer. So it's a little experiment for us, but we hope you enjoy it, and it's an opportunity for us to come together. For those of you who know EHS, Ethical Humanist Society well, welcome. For any newcomers, welcome for the first time. The Society has a mission to create a supportive and inclusive humanist community that inspires all to be their best selves, sustains us throughout life's milestones with celebrations, memorials, and festivals, respects science, art, and nature, promotes critical thinking and rational ways to solve human problems, and creates opportunities to take action to bring a better world for all. We value the importance of living an ethical, responsible, and joyful life. We promote intellectual, philosophical, and artistic freedom, avoiding dogma and rigid creed. We nurture a sense of wonder about life, nature, and the universe, and are inspired by positive models of human achievement, shaped by the forces of humanism, democracy, science, and religious reform. We cherish human diversity, and we focus on what we have in common, not on what keeps us apart. On Sundays throughout the year, we present speakers who join us to discuss a wide range of topics. And during the summer, we turn to our own members to continue these talks, and it's an opportunity for us all to learn from those around us. This morning, Society member Ben Ost will be joining us to talk about college. Is it still worth it? He will discuss the changing relationship between education and work, with a special attention to whether low-performing students are better off staying in college or dropping out. The structure of our presentation this morning should be familiar to those of you who have joined us before, with a few small adjustments. In a moment, I'll be introducing Ben and inviting him to begin his presentation. While Ben is speaking, I encourage you to think of questions to pose to him. Later in our presentation, I will actually be passing your questions along to Ben. Once Ben has completed his presentation, we will take a brief musical interlude to pass along the basket virtually, and then we will get to the questions. There should be plenty of time for everyone to submit a question. And then, as we always do, we will end our time together with society announcements. When we are together in our Skokie home, we do get to spend time after our presentations enjoying coffee and conversation. Obviously, it's a little hard to do that together now, but in the spirit of that coffee hour, we invite you to have a cup ready after the program and join a virtual coffee hour. I think on your screen you can see a link. If you go there and submit your name and email address, you will get back a link to join a Zoom get-together after the presentation. So in many ways, our community is coming together as it always does on Sundays, just a little shorter drive for most of us. So enough of those details. I think it's time to move on to today's presentation. Ben Ost is an assistant professor of economics at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Ben received a BA from Cornell College and his PhD from Cornell University. An award-winning professor, his articles have appeared in academic and professional journals. Ben's main areas of interest are labor economics and the economics of education, and he tracks data over time to study the cost and benefits of education. So please join me in welcoming Ben Ost.
Great, thanks Tim so much. All right, thank you all for virtually attending this morning. So I'm gonna be talking about, is college worth it? Hopefully everyone can hear me. And so I'll be talking about the costs and the benefits. And I wanted to start with showing this graph of the costs. Oh, I forgot my COVID disclaimer. All of this research is done before the pandemic, which is just to say things might change rapidly. All right, so this is the cost of college. And it seems like almost every year, newspapers have headlines about the cost of college is higher than it's ever been, and that's true. So the cost of college over about 50 years here has more than doubled. It's already inflation adjusted in these graphs, so it's gone from in today's dollars about 20,000 to a little bit more than 50,000 for tuition and room and board. And so that dramatic increase in costs, I think people are very aware of the fact that college costs more than ever before, and it raises this question of whether college is still a good deal, and whether college is still affordable. And so this is sort of one side of the story. The costs are rising, or at least tuition and room and board costs are rising. And then the other side of things is that there's been a big change in sort of the benefits of college or the necessity of college. So this graph shows us wages by education level from 1979 to 2018. So if you look at like the people without a high school degree, so this is no high school degree in 1980, they were making about $17 an hour. By 2018, that number had dropped considerably to about $13.50, so dropped more than 20%. At the other end of the spectrum, for advanced degrees, in 1980, they were making about $30 an hour, and that has risen. And so you see the advanced degrees, bachelor's degrees, earnings have been going up substantially. For people with a high school degree, no high school diploma, earnings have been going down. And so if you compare the gap in earnings in 1980 to the gap in earnings in 2018, say the gap from the top to the bottom has gone from roughly doubled to tripled. And so it's this big expansion in the level of inequality. That's something that you see sort of in every aspect of wages, that inequality is going up. But it means that the benefits of a bachelor's degree are a lot bigger than they used to be. Okay, so this is kind of a spoiler to my title, which is college still worth it? Yes, it's still worth it. It's a very good investment, at least on average. My talk is going to describe the costs and benefits of attending college in quite a bit of detail. And so it's definitely a good deal. If that's all you wanted to know, is it good? Is it a good investment? Yes, it is. And you can, I guess, sign out now. But to understand sort of key policy issues in higher education, you really need to understand those costs and benefits in a little bit more detail. And so the costs and benefits are complicated. A lot of the benefits and costs are intangible, things like the satisfaction that one gets from learning. That I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to mainly just talk about the money, but even just talking about the money, it's complicated. And so I'll focus first on just the costs, then I'll be talking about the benefits, and then I'll talk about a few other topics towards the end. So this is a description of the main costs of college. So we have tuition and fees, then we have grants, which is either federal grants or state grants or institutional scholarships. That's like a discount off those tuition and fees. Then we have room and board and foregone earnings during college. So the foregone earnings is when you're in college, you don't make as much money as if you hadn't gone to college. And so the difference between what you would have made and what you end up making in college is your foregone earnings. I'm going to focus today on mainly the tuition fees and the grants and sort of describing how those have changed over time and how those are different for different types of people. Room and board is kind of tricky because room and board is how much you pay for lodging and food while you're in college. You pay it as part of your payment to the university, so it goes to the university, but you're not really buying college with that money, you're buying food and lodging. And so if you didn't pay it to the university, you would have to pay something for room and board in some other way. And so it's not really a full cost of college. Foregone earnings during college is a cost of college, but it's a little tricky to measure. And that's sort of a longer talk. And so the biggest thing to remember when you're thinking about the cost of college is that graph that I showed before is dire looking with costs of $50,000 per year, but most people don't pay the full tuition. So this is just showing approximate costs at a private four-year college. You have tuition of around $30,000. You have grants of around $20,000. This is on average. And so the average person for their tuition and fees is only paying $10,000, even though the sticker price is $30,000. That's a pretty substantial discount. Room and board is $20,000, but again, that's not really a full cost of college. And then lost earnings is around $15,000. And so if you take your tuition minus your grants, your tuition is about $10,000, and then lost earnings is another $15,000. That's per year. Total costs are somewhere like $100,000 for a 4-year degree. Okay, so this is on average at private schools, private 4-year colleges. We can look at different kinds of schools like public schools or 2-year community colleges. For all of that, I'm going to focus on just the tuition and grant amount that people pay. And so we can figure this out using net price calculators. So every college in the US is required to post this net price calculator, which helps people figure out how much financial aid they would get. So I did this for Oakton Community College, which is right around the corner from the EHS building. And so for a student coming from a poorer family, if you type that information, I think I use $30,000 a year is your family income. Your tuition and fees at Oakton Community College would be $4,000, and your grants would be $6,000. And so your net tuition, how much you would owe Oakton, would be minus $2,000. That means that the grants more than cover the tuition and fees, and then you can use the excess $2,000 to cover things like living expenses or a laptop or some books, things along those lines. So this is not unusual. For poor families going to community college, they generally don't pay anything, and they're actually subsidized. If you look at public 4-year colleges, so this is like a university like UIC, University of Illinois, where I work. On average, this is the tuition level split by family income. And so the poorest 25% of families don't pay anything, and they actually get subsidized. So they don't pay any tuition. And they get $1,200 off of their room and board. The next 25% of families pay about $1,900 per year. And so these two numbers for the bottom half of families, so anyone who's making less than the median family income in the country, is paying, if they go to a 4-year public college, they're paying relatively little. So these numbers are similar to the amounts that are paid, say, in European countries that have heavily subsidized higher education, that oftentimes people compare the sticker price in the US to the sticker price in some European countries, and they say the US is incredibly expensive. It is expensive, but only for families that are on the richer side. And so the payment amount goes up from there. So New York State, several years ago, was the first state to make public college tuition free. Since then, a lot of other states have followed suit. There's something like 10 states right now that have free public college tuition. And in the last Democratic primary, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren both talked a lot about making public college free nationally. And so I'm not necessarily going to say that that's not a reasonable policy, but it's important to think about who this policy really benefits. And so in New York State, it was a tuition-free policy only for people earning less than $125,000. But in the discussion, people didn't really emphasize the fact that a lot of people already have free college in New York State. And so for New York State, it's a policy that mainly benefits upper middle class families. So in New York State, it was families earning between $80,000 and $125,000 were the ones that would benefit, or the ones that did benefit from having free public college. People earning, say, below $60,000 were paying zero to begin with, and so they didn't benefit at all. And people earning above $125,000 didn't qualify. And so if you have a national program that leads to free college, so for example, Obama suggested having a program where community colleges would be free for everybody. Community college is already free for anybody making below median income. It's very, very inexpensive for most people making, say, below the 75th percentile. And so really having free community college for everyone is just a subsidy for relatively affluent people. Again, it's not necessarily a bad policy. We already have free high school for everyone. And so free community college for everyone is not so different, but it's just a policy that benefits primarily rich people. Okay, so that was all for public colleges. This is for four-year private colleges, which are much more expensive. So at the four-year private colleges, this is showing net tuition, which is the amount that people actually have to pay. And you see that there's this big gradient where the poorest families pay around $4,000 and the richest families pay around $23,000. That difference is for all four-year private colleges across the country. So we can look at how this has changed over time. And so this shows for a 20-year period, tuition and grants for the richest 25% of families. And so I'm going to refer to these as rich families. They make more than 75% of the population. And the tuition level has gone up and up and up. And then at the same time, the grants that they receive, even though they're rich, they have gotten more and more generous grants. And this is mainly going to not the very, very top of the income distribution, but people who are in the richest 25%, but not at the very top. And so the amount that people actually have to pay is the difference between the orange line here, the tuition, and the grants that they get. And so that has increased very slightly over this time period. We can look at the same thing for poorer families. And so for poorer families, the orange line again has gone up and up. That's just the listed price at the colleges they go to. But the blue line, which is the grants, that's also gone up a lot. And actually it's gone up more. So if you look at the gap between the orange line, the tuition, and the grants that they receive, that's actually gone down. And so the net price that the poorest 25% of families have to pay has decreased over time, not increased. That suggests that the system has become more progressive as prices have gone up. So we can combine those tuition and grants to make net prices and graph that. So this graph, I think, is a good summary of how costs have changed at four-year private colleges. So first in the gray line looks over a 20-year period what the sticker price is, or what the listed price is at four-year private colleges. And so that in 1996 was around 22,000. By 2016, it's almost 40,000. That sticker price is only paid for, or only people who are in the richest 10% of families are going to pay that sticker price. And even among that group, some people get financial aid or merit scholarships, and so not everyone pays. If you look at the richer families, those are people in the top 25%, their net price in the orange line has gone up from around 18,000 to around 23,000, so about a 20% increase. Not so small of an increase, but again, this is over 20 years. And then for the net price for poorer families, it's gone down, or it's mostly stable, but in the last 10 years or 15 years, it's gone down. Okay, so when we think about what's the cost of college, it doesn't really make that much sense to think of the sticker price increasing as the cost of college. We really want to think about what different families are actually ending up paying. Okay, so the fact that sticker prices are so different than what people actually pay has a lot of benefits. So one of the benefits is that it makes it a very progressive system. So very, very affluent people who can afford it have to pay a lot for college. People who cannot afford it pay much less. And so it's a progressive system, much more progressive than, say, income taxes in the US. The other benefit is for universities. They get to charge different people different amounts for tuition. And so every business would love to be in that position where they can charge each person something different, and universities get to do it. So that's a benefit for them. The downside, though, and I think this is a pretty big downside, is that sticker prices end up being very misleading for poorer families. And so if a family is poor and they look in the newspaper and they see that Northwestern University costs $80,000 a year, they might just rule that university out and not even consider applying to Northwestern because they think it's going to be just too expensive. So I went ahead and calculated tuition and room and board at 2 colleges in the area. One is Northwestern University in Evanston, and one is Northeastern Illinois. And so these are 2 very different kinds of schools. Northwestern is much more selective, and it's much more expensive, at least on paper. So the sticker price is $80,000 almost at Northwestern for room and board and tuition. For Northeastern, it's $30,000. Okay, so I then use the Northwestern calculator, the net price calculator, Northeastern's net price calculator, and figured out how much would this actually cost for somebody who's coming from a lower income background. And so if you're earning below $30,000, Northwestern's total room and board and tuition cost would be $3,000 for you. It's $3,000 plus they say it comes with an offer of student work, which pays $3,000. So your total net price would be 0. That includes room and board, includes tuition, includes fees. At Northeastern, on the other hand, it's $15,000. And that's because Northeastern doesn't have the same kind of resources to provide big scholarships as Northwestern. I want to emphasize that this is the tuition assuming you get in, but with no merit aid. It's just based on financial need. And so this is not like a one-off or a cherry-picked example. It's very, very common that schools that have more resources, schools that are more prestigious, will be cheaper for poor families than would be a less prestigious school. And so the worry is that some poor families might see Northwestern sticker price, get scared off by the 80,000, decide instead that they're going to scrimp and save and try to go to Northeastern. They'll get admitted to Northeastern, go to Northeastern, and end up having to pay much more than they would have had they gone to Northwestern instead. This is assuming it's a strong student who could get into either place. Okay, so I just played around a little bit with Northwestern's net price calculator just to see what they charge for different family incomes. And so one thing is I just, to keep it simple, said that none of the families have any assets like housing wealth or things like that. I just said different income levels. And so if you go to the Northwestern's net price calculator and tell them that you have family income of 70,000 or anything less, your total cost is 4,000. That's including room and board for the year. If you say that you have an income of 150,000, which definitely puts you affluent or very, very, very upper middle class, your total cost is 31,000. So that one I think is interesting because their listed price is 80,000 or 78,000. The total cost for somebody making 150,000 just based on financial need is 30. And so they're giving more than a 50% discount for somebody who, by most measures, is doing quite well financially. And so that just suggests that it's not just poor families that are getting big, big financial aid from universities, especially affluent universities like Northwestern. I just kept on going up until they stopped giving me a need-based scholarship. And I thought it was funny that even at 250,000, so if you tell them that you make 250,000 as a family, your total cost is 75,000, which is less than the sticker price of 78. And so they say that you get a need-based scholarship of 3,000 if you're making $250,000 a year. Again, without assets, but you have to be making, I think it was something like 300,000 before they say you have enough money to be able to pay our tuition without a discount. Okay, so a lot of poorer students report not considering colleges due to cost, which is a big problem. So it's a problem with a relatively easier solution than a lot of other problems. So you just have to provide information about the cost of college. People are already trying to do that. So like every university has this net price calculator, but sometimes more personalized information or a little bit of a nudge can make a big difference here. So the one experiment that I just want to highlight that's pretty dramatic, I think, is this H&R Block experiment. So this was an experiment where they provided poor families with help filling out the FAFSA. The FAFSA is this financial aid application. Anyone who's filled it out knows that it's kind of complicated. And so in the experiment, all they did was they helped provide, I think it was 15 minutes of assistance with filling out the FAFSA. And then what they did is they tracked who went to college and who didn't after that experiment. And the headline result, which is really dramatic, is that help filling out the FAFSA increases college attendance by 25% among poor families. And so I have that bullet twice here, just because I didn't want to forget to say it twice, which is help filling out FAFSA increases college attendance by 25%. It's a dramatic increase. College attendance is really important for those families. A 15-minute intervention substantially changes their life. Okay. So that was the costs of college. The rest, or the next part of the talk, is going to be about the benefits of college. And like the costs, there's a lot of different benefits. Some of them are intangible. I'm just going to focus on the earnings benefits. So this shows average annual earnings for full-time workers over the age of 25 with a BA degree versus a high school degree currently. So people with a BA make about 60,000. People with a high school degree make about 35,000. That is a pretty big gap in earnings, and it adds up over the whole life course. But that difference in earnings is not really the benefit of college. So a lot of people take that difference and say that's what college does. The problem with saying that is that the people who go to college or college graduates probably would have earned more than high school graduates, even if they hadn't gone to college. So even before going to college, they tend to have better skills, better work ethic, more well-connected parents, et cetera, a lot of different advantages that's both allowing them to go to college and also is going to be the reason that they make more money later on. So this is the idea of correlation versus causation. It's like the #1 issue that most social scientists have to deal with, which is that, yes, college graduates earn more. So earning more is correlated with going to college, but this is just a correlation. It's not really necessarily the case that college causes you to earn more. So there's a lot of things you can do for this. I think most researchers would agree that this difference, the 60,000 versus 35,000, probably overstates the benefit of college. There's probably some benefit of college in there, but it's not the full amount. And so how can you figure this out? How can you figure out what's the actual benefit of college, not just the correlation? And so in order to establish causation, in the sciences, we tend to try to run experiments. And so for college, the experiment would look something like this. We would get thousands of people. For each person, we flip a coin. We randomly decide, you go to college, you don't go to college. You go to college, you don't go to college. And it's random. And then at the end of the randomized experiment, after we measure earnings, we can just compare the earnings of the people who went to college to the people who didn't. And that should tell us what college does. This is obviously not very feasible. And so in economics and other social sciences, instead of running an actual randomized experiment like this, what we have to do is find sort of special circumstances where there was something that was similar to a randomized experiment, but something that happened naturally that we don't actually do. And so that's called a natural experiment. It's like a randomized experiment that just happened naturally. So there's two main ways of estimating the benefits of college. The first is what I'll call the naive approach. This is just comparing the earnings of high school and college graduates. So that's like comparing the 60,000 number to the $35,000 number and saying that that's the benefit of college. I think that overstates the benefits. The second way of doing it is running this natural experiment where you find some situation where people randomly either got a college degree or didn't get a college degree. And then you can compare groups that aren't really different from one another. Okay, so the advantage of the first approach, even though I'm calling it the naive approach, it's something that people use a lot. And the reason is for the naive approach, using surveys, we can calculate that every single year for any state in the country. We can look at how it's changed over time. So this is just the difference between college earnings and high school earnings. We can calculate that very easily. The natural experiment approach, you can only figure it out in very special circumstances. And usually it's not going to be possible to estimate it for everybody. It's just going to be like the sort of unusual circumstances that leads to a natural experiment are not going to come up over and over and over again. So we can't compare the benefits over time using that approach. So the first estimates I'll show uses the naive approach. This is showing the monetary lifetime benefits of attending college over time. And again, the benefit here is just the difference in earnings between a college graduate and a high school graduate over their lifetime. And so in 1976, that number was about 300,000. That's the total benefit of attending college. By 2010, that number had risen to 450,000. If you extend that to now, it's fairly stable at around 450,000. And so that's a pretty large benefit. That might be overstated a bit. On the same graph, you can show the costs, which is just adding up tuition and the foregone earnings costs. And so if we look at what that looks like, these are the costs. And so costs have gone up a lot. The total 4-year costs have gone from 50,000 to almost 100,000. This is what people end up actually paying. But even though the costs have gone up this huge amount, it's not even close to the benefits, the lifetime benefits. And it's because the costs are all concentrated in this 4-year period, but the benefits last a lifetime. And so I don't think we're anywhere near the point where costs are not, where it's not worth it. It's a very good investment, at least on average. Okay, so that's the naive approach. The next thing I'll talk about is what are the increases in earnings that are actually caused by college. So I'll talk about one example of a natural experiment that I did. So along with 2 co-authors, we're studying how low achieving college students benefit from staying in college. And so this is the research question. Does sleeping through class or being low achieving in other ways benefit students? So if you stay in school, but you're not doing very well, does that lead to more money later on? Okay. So the natural experiment that we have is set in Ohio. And just to remind you, what we're looking for is something where people sort of randomly complete college or don't complete college. And it's not because of their characteristics. So in Ohio, some students get expelled because of persistently low GPA below a 2.0. And so students who get expelled are definitely not a random group. We know that they're going to be less motivated. They're going to be less academically inclined. So what our goal is we're going to try to find a group that all the students are very similar, but some of them get expelled and others don't get expelled. And we're hoping that the reason that some get expelled and others don't is going to be for a random reason. Then if we find that group and we can sort of essentially randomize who gets kicked out of college and who gets to stay, we can then compare the earnings later on to see what's the effect of staying in school for these low achieving students. Okay, so this is what our natural experiment's going to look like. This is just an example of a student, but we have student 1 who sleeps through class and her GPA is below a 2.0 and she gets placed on academic probation. And then the next term, she still is sleeping through class. She's still not doing very well. And her GPA is very close, but still below a 2.0. And so she gets dismissed and she gets kicked out of college. And then we're going to look at her earnings later on. We're going to compare her to another student who we're hoping is very similar. So student 2, also sleeping through class. She gets placed on academic probation in the same way. And then that next term, she's still sleeping through class. She's still not doing very well, but she happens to get a GPA that's 2.01, so just a little bit higher. And because of the way the rules work, she doesn't get dismissed. She gets another chance. She might get dismissed later, but at least for now, she doesn't get dismissed right away. And so she's much more likely to end up graduating. And then we'll look at her earnings. And so we're going to compare student 1 to student 2. We're hoping that student 1 and student 2 are pretty similar types of people, but one gets kicked out of college and one doesn't, for a more or less random reason that one person had a slightly higher GPA. Okay, so the data that we use to study this is all public 4-year colleges in Ohio for around 10 years. It's around 2 million students, and we can link all 2 million students to their earnings at around ages 28 to 30, so long as they stay in Ohio. So what we're going to actually do is not use all 2 million students. So again, we can only do the natural experiment for a subset of students. So we're going to compare earnings of the students who are barely dismissed to the earnings of students who are barely not dismissed. So all these low achieving students who are on the margin of getting dismissed Some get dismissed and kicked out of school, and some get to stay. That's around 10,000 students total. And so the way we'll do it is we're going to focus in on the semester that they're at risk of being dismissed. That's a semester that they're on probation. And so all these students are on probation, and we're going to look at their GPA. So here I have a graph of the x-axis here is GPA when on probation. And so we're looking at just in a narrow range, people with a 1.85, 1.9, 1.95, or anything below a 2.0 are going to be dismissed. So people on the left side of the red line get dismissed. People on the right side of the red line, at least right now, don't get dismissed. So they get to stay, and they'll be more likely to graduate. The y-axis here is weekly earnings at age 30. And so that is our outcome. And what we're trying to understand is, do the people who are above the threshold and don't get dismissed, do they end up making more money later on, about 10 years later, than the people who got kicked out of college? We in general think that people with a higher GPA are going to make more money, not because of the GPA, just because of things that are correlated with that. And so we expect sort of an upward sloping relationship overall. And what we're wondering is there a jump when you cross that red line and go from people who are getting kicked out of college to people who aren't? So this is what the actual data looks like. These are just the average earnings of people who have different GPA amounts. And so what I hope you see clearly is that there does seem to be an upward sloping relationship overall, but then there's also this jump that people who cross this threshold are able to earn substantially more than people below the threshold. And that's the benefit of being able to stay in school. So the takeaway here, I think, is important, is that even these really low achieving students who are more or less failing at college still benefit a lot if they're allowed to stay. Okay, so that's the takeaway from our study. There's some caveats to both our study and just the benefits that I've talked about in general. It's the benefit of college on average. Not everyone gets the same benefit. I think it's probably true that some people go to college and it's a mistake and they don't actually benefit from college at all. One of the things that really determines the financial value of college is one's major. The gap between the highest earning majors and the lowest earning majors, that's actually around the same size as the gap between college graduates and high school graduates. And so major matters a lot. There's a bunch of other factors that matter a lot. Selectivity of institution matters to some degree. But on average, college is a really, really, really good investment. And so for the vast majority of people, it's at least a positive investment. Okay, so the last topic that I want to talk about is this question of, is college for everyone? So if it's a good deal on average, should we be encouraging more people to go, and should we encourage everyone to go? So a lot of high schools have a goal of having 100% of their graduates from high school go on to college. And there's a bit of pushback from that. Some people have this gut negative reaction that says, like, not everyone should be going to college, not everyone's college material. And then also maybe if everyone goes to college and everyone's college educated, then who's going to do menial labor? Who's going to do sort of low income work? And so I want to talk just a little bit about this question of, is college for everyone? So I think I don't actually know the answer to that question. Is college for everyone? I think it's possibly yes, but I don't know. But when you're thinking about the question, it's important to just keep in mind that education is a continuum. College isn't special. So it's reasonable to ask questions like, is high school for everyone? Is elementary school for everyone? Right now in the US, we think that high school is for everyone. We try to get everyone to graduate high school, but it's not at all clear that that is how it has to be. And historically, it hasn't been. And so the argument that says that high school is not for everyone is just that if you're not planning on doing academic material, why do you have to study sort of high level academics at the high school level? So this is just an example of a question on I think it's a 9th grade exam. So this is if 4x squared minus 100 equals 0, what are the roots of the equation? And I just want you to think for yourself about whether you've used this skill as an adult at all. This is like factoring. So I think for most people, the answer is no, that you haven't used this specific skill as an adult. And so the question is, does it make sense for people to go to high school and study kind of complicated academic material if they're not actually going to apply that knowledge later on? It's similar to the discussion about college. Should everyone go to college if they're not going to be doing an academic sort of job? Okay, so to think about this, it's helpful to get some historical perspective. So in 1900, almost nobody in the entire world went to high school. It's really rounded down to 0. From 1900 to 1950, enrollment increased a lot, but it really only increased in the US. So worldwide, it was still a small fraction. In the US, high school became common. And so this graph shows us the high school enrollment and graduation rates over time. In 1900, the enrollment rate was around 10%. So this is the fraction of students who ever enroll in high school. So 90% of people in 1900 did not go to high school at all. And then that rose dramatically in the US. From 1900 to around 1940, it went from nobody or only 10% enrolling in school to 70% enrolling in school. So it's a really, really big change. During this whole time period, there was a lot of discussion of, does it make sense for people to be going to high school? Is everybody high school material? And in the US, they decided, yes, it does. And so now the enrollment rate, this graph only goes from 1890 to 1970. Now the enrollment rate is basically 100%. It wasn't like this everywhere. So in the US, if we compare the US to the UK, so in 1935, the UK had 20% of its 14 to 17-year-olds in school. It's not that they were all brilliant and had graduated early, it's that they just never enrolled. So in the UK in 1935, most people didn't go to high school. In the same year in the US, 70% were going to high school, or 70% of 14 to 17-year-olds were in school. And so that's a really dramatic difference in terms of what people are doing in different countries. So in the US, teenagers were mainly in school. In the UK, teenagers were mainly not in school. This difference between the US and the rest of the world persisted for quite a while. So even in 1955, if you look at the rest of the world in 1955 and calculate a similar statistic to this, you find that this is just a partial list of countries that had fewer than 30% of its 15 to 18-year-olds enrolled in school full-time in 1955. So the UK had fewer than 30% enrolled. France had fewer than 30% enrolled. Germany, Norway, all of them here is, I think, accurate, actually. I don't think there was a single country aside from the US that had more than 30% of students enrolled sort of in high school age years. So in most countries in the world, even in 1955, which is not so long ago, most people didn't go to high school. In the US in the same year, it was 80%. And so when we think about American exceptionalism, I think this is one example where America, the United States, really was exceptional. It was just way, way, way ahead of the rest of the world in terms of high school enrollment. So when we're thinking about, is college for everyone, just keep in mind that it's this continuum. You need to think it's high school for everyone, is college for everyone, is grad school for everyone. I don't know where exactly we should fall, but right now we're just at a point in time in that continuum. We've seen increases in education levels for a long time, and I wouldn't be surprised if those increases continue. And so this is showing us the distribution of education at different time periods, going back to 1940. So in 1940, among adults, 64% of the adults had less than a high school degree. So high school was just not common. And it was about a third of adults who either had a high school degree or some college or a college degree. So in 1940, the norm was being a high school dropout. That's what most people were. This is how it's changed since then. So this shows each decade and how the distribution of education levels has changed. So in 2015, about 10% of people are high school dropouts. Another quarter have a high school diploma, and almost 2/3 have some college or a bachelor's degree. And so it's a really dramatic change over the past 70 years in terms of the amount of education that people are getting. And I wouldn't be surprised if that trend continues into the future. All right, so I just want to conclude with one last sort of big picture slide that's talking not about college, but just about education in general. So this graph shows over 200 years, from 1820 to 2015, just the share of the world, everybody in the whole world, older than 15 years, that had at least some kind of formal education. So if you went to first grade and dropped out, you count as having education here. And so in 1820, about 80% of the world had no formal education of any sort. By 2015, about 80% of the world has some formal education, and many people have quite a bit. And so that's a pretty amazing change to our world in a 200-year period. All right, I think I'm all done. Thank you very much, everybody, for virtually attending. And if you're interested, this website, College Scorecard, has a lot of information where you can look up any college you want and find the kind of information I was discussing about costs and benefits. Okay.
Great, Ben. Thank you for all of that. That was really kind of interesting. And I'm sure we all have questions, which we will be able to submit to Ben. I'll take care of asking those for you. But first, we're going to pass the basket. When we're together in person, we actually pass the basket in the true sense of the word. Today, you can assume it's going to be a little different, and it is. It's going to be virtual. If you visit ethicalhumanistsociety.org/donate, you can make a donation by PayPal or credit card to the society. And you can also use Zelle to make a direct donation using donate@ethicalhuman.org. You can see those links crawling on the bottom of the screen. We suggest a donation of $5, but of course we welcome any donation you may wish to make, and we appreciate all who sustain the society with their donations of time and money. So we are back. It is time for questions. I will be asking Ben questions on your behalf, you, the audience. You can submit your questions in the chat box. I believe some questions have been coming in. I would remind you to ask questions, not make comments, and I will try and get to as many questions as possible. We're going to start out with the first question that I see, and this touches on the idea, Ben, of the value of a major in college. And the question is, are the STEM subjects, that would be science, technology, engineering, and math, are the STEM subjects the best for financial success 10 years out of college?
Yeah, that's an easy question. Yes, they're the best. So them, along with finances or like financial business kind of majors, sometimes do well, though those are higher variance. I would say something like chemical engineering, various kinds of engineering are consistently at the top. Computer science, math, not as much, but yes, broadly.
Okay. Next question is, if college is not more expensive, why is college debt so much higher now than earlier years? What's the disconnect, perhaps, between those?
Yeah, so I guess I should say college is more expensive today than it used to be. It's not more expensive for families earning lower incomes, but it is more. There's a few things going on with college debt. I had some slides with college debt, but I didn't get to talk about them. So college debt, part of the global increase in the amount of college debt, so I forget the exact number, but it's something like more than $1 trillion, maybe more than $1.5 trillion of college debt. That big increase is, a big part of that is just that more people are going to college, so more people take out loans, so there's more debt nationally. So that I think is not a problem. Just if you have more people going to college, you're going to have more debt in student loans. The amount per person has also gone up. And that I think is two things. One is that the college price really has gone up, not dramatically, or not as dramatically as the net, or as the sticker price makes it seem, but it has gone up. And then the other thing is a lot more people are going to college, which means on average, the people who are going to college today are poorer than the people who were going to college 30 years ago or 40 years ago. So college used to be much more of an elite institution than it is today. And so when it was a more elite institution, people didn't need to borrow as much to go. Now it's more widely accessible, more people borrow money to be able to go. I don't think that's a problem. I see college debt as sort of, if somebody goes and borrows money and then they go to college, get a benefit from that college degree and then pay it back, that seems like what is supposed to happen with an investment. You go into debt and then you pay it off. The problem is obviously if people are defaulting. And so default rates today have gone up since around 2005. They've gone up quite a bit, but they're much, much lower than they were back in the 90s. And so default rates have really plummeted since the 90s. Like I think it's less than half what it was in the 90s. So default rates have gone up and down. The one thing about college debt that I think people sometimes aren't aware of is that most people have not very little, but most people don't have a lot of college debt when they graduate. And so I think it's something like 70% have college debt below 25,000 total. That's like the total amount of debt that they have is less than 25,000. If you're thinking of college debt of like $100,000 of college debt, that's something like 3% of all graduates have some debt of like $100,000 or more. And so it's also the case that the people who default the most are the people with the smallest debt. So you have very, very high default rates of people who have borrowed, I think, under $3,000. So people who have $3,000 worth of debt default at really high rates. And that's usually because they're people who just went to college for a semester, didn't graduate, end up with not a very good job, but have this, couple $1,000s in debt that they're probably defaulting on a lot of other things as well.
Okay. Next question is, how do the jobs that the economy create match with what people are studying in college? And might a better match produce a better return on investment?
I don't know if I totally understand the question, but
let's see.
I can still answer something related, which is that the types of jobs that you see in the US have changed a lot, especially with globalization, where a college degree is more and more necessary because it tends to be a lot of the high skilled jobs have grown and lower skilled jobs have left the country. And so I do think it's the case that college is increasingly necessary. I don't know about the return on investment part, if I totally understood that.
Okay. Our next question is, how much of the increased earning power of a college degree is due to many jobs now requiring the degree that didn't used to, presumably as an applicant filter, since so many have degrees now? And I should say, I can repeat the questions for you if that helps you.
I think I understood. So the question is asking whether the benefit to college comes from the fact that some jobs just won't consider you at all if you don't have a college degree, like a filter.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. So the benefits to a college degree could come from having access to jobs that just say that it's a required credential. But even jobs that don't say that it's a required credential, college can be valuable because it teaches you skills that might allow you to get promotions and things like that once you get hired. But I'm not sure of the relative amounts there.
Okay. The next question, to what extent is the large increase in the income gap between those with and without degrees attributable to the decline in labor unions?
Again, I don't know. So I can say that the decline in labor unions has played a role in the rise in inequality, but I can't give a specific number for this share of the change in the returns to education that's attributable to unions. So it is the case that 50 years ago, because of unions, but then also just because of manufacturing being successful in general in the US, 50 years ago, it was possible to have a strong salary without a college degree. And so the decline of unions and the decline of manufacturing went sort of hand in hand in the US, and I'm not sure of the relative contributions of each one.
Okay. The next question kind of relates to that one a bit, and the question is, where is vocational training in the analysis? So what role does vocational training play in this whole conversation about education?
Yeah, so I was mainly focused on four-year colleges. At two-year colleges, like community colleges, vocational training is pretty common. There's things like certificates that community colleges provide, and then the other type of vocational training that's common is at for-profit universities or for-profit colleges that will have things like a boot camp that teaches you how to code in 6 months, or other forms of vocational training. There's not as much as, say, in a country like Germany with like apprenticeships. The US doesn't have a ton of that, but there are high schools that have vocational programs that can teach people to go into auto mechanic sort of jobs. I don't know that much about the changes over time in vocational training in the US, but yeah, at the four-year level, I would say vocational is pretty rare.
Okay. Related to where we are in the world right now, if COVID continues to impact face-to-face instruction for the next few years, any guess what kind of impact, if any, this will have on the benefits of staying in college for the current cohort? And I think this is a question just sort of a wide open, what's happening with education, and
this is a tough one.
I'm going to leave it at that and let you work on that one.
Yes, I am thinking a lot about that. So this fall at UIC, where I teach, we're going to be, a hybrid of online and in person. I think that there's no question that it's not going to be as good for students as if we were in person. And so to the extent that the benefit of college is mainly about what you learn, I think people are probably going to learn less. Now, there's another part of college, which is just sort of a screening mechanism that just says, like, you're a college graduate, congratulations, you have this degree. And so if that's still going to be there, I'm hopeful that we're not going to be online for so long. Every indication I've heard is that for the 21-22 academic year, we'll probably be in person, but who knows? And so my hope is that it's not going to have a long-lasting impact, but it might. The group that I'm actually most worried about is the students not that are currently in college, but the students that are currently graduating college. Graduating during a time like this is likely to have long-lasting negative effects on their earnings and other aspects of their life, just because their initial job is really important, and it's tough right now.
Okay. Based on your research, do you think it makes sense for families to be saving money to send their kids to college, or should they not save and plan to depend on financial aid?
Yeah, so I think it makes sense to save. Again, it depends on the individual's particular financial situation. You shouldn't be saving for the sticker price. That doesn't make sense. So if you save expecting to pay $80,000 at Northwestern and you're not super affluent, you'll have oversaved. That can be especially problematic if you save in a tax privileged savings account, like a 529, where you actually can't use that money for anything other than education. So you don't want to oversave, but it still makes sense to save up front. I think some people are worried that if they save too much up front, they won't qualify for financial aid. And that is, there's an element of truth to that, but most of the financial aid determination is based on income, not based on savings. And so I think it's something, in the Northwestern one, I played around with it. If I increased the assets by a few $100,000, so like made it so that we had saved $200,000, it increased tuition by $5,000. And so it does increase, but it's not a huge penalty for having a lot of savings. So I think it still makes sense for most families to save.
Okay. Please do, everyone, continue to submit questions. We still have some time for more questions. And sticking with the sort of cost facet of college, the question is the push from the left for debt forgiveness unwarranted?
That's a good question. I don't know. That strikes me as a little unfair. This is just me personally talking. I don't really have any research to support this, but it is a little difficult to have created these policies where people can take out loans and go into debt, and then after the fact change all the rules. And so I can say that if I borrowed a lot of money and paid it off, and then after I paid it off, the government forgave everybody else's loans, I might be a little bit annoyed. Also, for the people who, if you think about who's going to benefit the most from debt forgiveness, so I think it makes total sense for the federal government to forgive everybody's debt if your debt is less than 3,000 or less than 5,000. That would be cheap to do. You're not getting that much money from these people. And these are people who didn't go through college for the most part, and so they didn't really get the benefit. But for the people who are, in debt $80,000, if you went to Harvard and you got a high-paying job after graduating and you had to go into debt, I think you should pay back the amount that you borrowed because you got a lot of benefit from that loan. And so I don't really agree with the idea that we should just clear people's debt. I think you probably want to instead do something where you have an income contingent repayment. And so that would be a situation where if you don't have enough money right now to pay back your loans, you can defer the loan, or you can even have it wiped eventually clean if after 10 years you still haven't been able to pay it back. So in Australia, they have this kind of model where the amount that you have to pay back on your loan is dependent on how much you make after you graduate college. One thing I think a lot of people are unaware of is that actually in the United States, we have that program too already. That already exists. And so when you go and get loans for federal financial aid, you can select when you're getting the loans initially that you want it to be dependent on your income. If how much you pay back is dependent on your income. And so if you do that, if you graduate college and you can't find a job, you would owe nothing. You don't have to pay back until you have income. And then once you have income, the amount that you have to pay back is dependent on how much you're making each year. The downside of choosing the income contingent repayment is that you pay a higher interest rate. But it's not so much higher. And I think it's if there's any uncertainty about whether you're going to be able to pay back these loans or whether you're going to be able to make enough money afterwards, it makes sense for families to do. Right now, almost nobody does it.
Okay. The next question is the idea that college is not worth it is in the popular media. Is there data that supports that view, the opposite conclusion from yours?
That college is not worth it?
Yeah. So reconcile, I mean, there is this view that college is not worth it for everyone. It seems to be slightly different than the view you're putting forth.
So there are certainly individual people who don't benefit from college. So if you, it's hard to pinpoint who exactly that is, but people who major in things, I mean, also it's difficult. If you major in something that you really love, and then you get a job after college that's related to that major that doesn't pay very well, but you really enjoy your job, I'm not sure if it's clear that college wasn't worth it for you. Like maybe you don't make more money, but you get benefits from your job in some other way. There's also a lot of evidence that people who go to college end up healthier, are less likely to get divorced, all sorts of other benefits that I didn't talk about. So I don't think there's, I would say it is not that everybody benefits from college, but the vast majority do. And you have some people on the other end, like Bill Gates, probably doesn't benefit from going to college. He's better off dropping out and starting Microsoft.
Somewhat related to that, is there any data that attempts to peel apart the value added from the social aspects, for example, networking, the social aspects of college?
Not very well. So I actually have one former student who has a study of that, looking at peer effects. And sort of he tracks whether you're likely to get hired by somebody who went to your college, and he finds evidence that yes, there is some social peer effect sort of benefit. That benefit's even larger for like MBA programs, master's degrees of sort of the business-oriented master's degrees. But I don't think I don't have any sort of estimate of how much of it is peers versus how much of it is what you learn versus socialization versus other things.
Okay. Next question. How does community college to college pipeline affect these calculations as opposed to the full time at a four-year college? Happy with just opinion if you don't have the data.
Sure. So community college, currently the community college to college pipeline is, I would say, not working all that well. So not a lot of people successfully go to community college for a few years and then transfer to a four-year school and then graduate. That's a pretty uncommon thing to do. The cost of community college is less, but again, the difference between the cost of community college and a four-year school is biggest for relatively affluent families. So the difference in costs from like a public school to community college is maybe about $10,000. And that is for like an affluent family. For a, say, very low income family, there's really no difference because it would be free either way.
Next question. Looking for more comments, I think, from you. The question is, could you talk about being strategic about applying to college? Say, going to a college where academic record is better than average in order to get more grant money?
Yeah, so this is something I probably wasn't clear about, but the grants, all of the grants that I was talking about, almost all the grants I was talking about, have nothing to do with your merit. They're just straight up financial aid. So when I went on the Northwestern website, I didn't have to tell it what my grades are like, whether I have a lot of extracurriculars. I just told it how much my family makes, and that's the grants that they spit out. And so if you get merit aid, that's going to be just on top of this. In terms of strategic application, I think the conventional wisdom makes sense, which is you apply to safety schools, sort of middle of the road schools, and some reach schools. That conventional wisdom tends to be followed only by people, or not only, but mostly by people who are a little bit more advantaged and have more information. And so one of the major problems that I see in higher education is you have a lot of very high achieving, low income college students or low income students who don't apply to any selective schools. And they sometimes only apply to one school that they know somebody who went there and had a good experience, and they just don't apply widely enough. The idea of being, I think, separate from the grants is this idea of, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? And that I think is more individual. It depends on the person. I will say some people shy away from like big universities because of, say, sports or things along those lines, especially high achieving low income students oftentimes report they don't want to go to a school like Champaign because it's too sports focused. And that I think is oftentimes a mistake, because the university is a diverse institution. You can find sort of the part of it that you fit into well.
Okay, we're getting down towards the end. I have a couple more questions I'm going to pose to Ben. The first of those is, in countries with low rates of high school attendance, how is it feasible to increase from 20% to 80% given presumable loss of productive labor? And how long is it reasonable to expect meaningful change to take?
Yeah, so the 20% to 80%, that was for the whole world over 200 years. So I think it's true that you need to do it gradually, though in the US, it wasn't super gradual. It was, a 20-year period where we went something like 20% to 80%. The loss in productive labor is presumably made up for by when people graduate from high school, they're even more productive. So I think this is something I don't know a ton about, but it's interesting to think about, like, what is it about the high school degree that makes people more productive? A lot of people see the United States huge growth rate in the 1950s and 60s as a result of the big investments in education in the 30s and 40s. But again, a lot of the people who had a high school degree weren't working in academic settings. And so there's just something about a longer time period in school, more development of sort of maybe critical thinking skills that's valuable in all sorts of aspects. So I think the loss that you're referring to in sort of direct productivity of a 15-year-old working on the farm, say, instead of going to school is probably made up for by the long-term benefits from having that 15-year-old a couple of years later. They're now going to be more productive for the rest of their life.
I have a couple of questions that I think we can kind of combine them, so bear with me as I attempt to do that on the fly here. The first question is, I'm curious where your data come from, and then I think you can also, with that answer, address, did your research disaggregate based on race, ethnicity of students? If so, are there any interesting patterns in this regard?
So, sorry,
the first question is simply, where did your data come from? The second question is, did your research disaggregate based on race and ethnicity of students? If so, are there any interesting patterns in this regard?
Yeah, so the data that I've personally analyzed the most is the data from Ohio that I mentioned. That data comes from a couple different sources. One is all the universities in the state. All the public universities are required to provide detailed information about their students to the state of Ohio. And then separately, people in the state of Ohio, their earnings are always tracked by unemployment insurance records. And so the state maintains, this is for every state, maintains information about everybody's earnings in the state for the purposes of providing unemployment insurance if it comes up. And so even if you're not claiming unemployment insurance, they still have your information about what you earned each quarter. And so the data that I use there is getting data merged between this State Department of Education and the UI record so that we can see both what people are doing in college and also what they earn when they graduate. For that, I don't think we looked separately by race. So I don't know. For the other data that I talked about, like the cost of college, that's all just public. collegescorecard.gov is the website I mentioned at the end. You can find all that information. Anybody can. I can't remember if I think they do show it separately by race and ethnicity. I haven't looked recently, but I believe a general pattern is that the benefit of attending a really highly selective college tends to be bigger for minority and low-income students than those benefits for more affluent people.
Thank you, Ben. I think that's about it for questions this morning. Thank you so much for your presentation and taking the time to answer questions with us. We're going to finish up today, as we always do, with society announcements. Can't have a program without them. They're pretty quick today. The first one is to just let you know that yesterday our Ethical Action Committee held a food and toiletry drive for the Niles Food Pantry and the Hillside Food Pantry. It was very successful. We collected about 15 boxes or 3 carloads full of donations. Thank you to all who participated and donated. And thank you to Beth Carlin, Joe Farkas, Chris Martin, and Kente Kinney for handling and delivering all of the donations. And we're thinking about making this a monthly event. Not next Sunday, 2 weeks from today, we will be doing our next program. It will be a virtual program, as they will be all summer. Jeff Wag will talk about lending a hand during a pandemic. You can visit our society website to get the link to attend that program. You can also find all sorts of news and information about our society by going to ethicalhumanistsociety.org. Lots of information there. Again, thank you to Ben for joining us, and thank you for all of you for coming together and spending a little bit time together as a community. Remember that if you want to join in the Zoom coffee hour immediately after this, there is a link there. Just go there, fill out a little form, and you will get an invitation to attend that coffee hour. Again, thank you. We look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Stay healthy, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you very much.